Howdy, my name is Indrasil, and in this video I will introduce you to some advanced turret building techniques in Starship EVO. It's scripted in a way that possibly will let you follow along as you build without even looking at it, but feel free to do it anyway. Now, some of you might have already learned of some basic turret design, and if you have, you can skip to this time frame. As for the rest of you who haven't, I will do a quick rundown of things necessary to build a basic turret. In order to make use of almost every mechanism you might want to install on your creation, you need plenty of power and heat dissipation headroom. These are achieved with reactors and armor blocks or bricks respectively. For details on both, you should consult your ship's building drone tab or spaceship core if you've installed one already. A thruster or two might also help in an off chance a stray pirate ship bumps into you. It's also a good idea to place down a yoke and link it to the spaceship core in case you wanted to reorient your ship and expose the other side of it to the sun. Moving on to the turret itself, you've gotta open up the codex and grab yourself a block or brick, a rotator, a laser or beam weapon, a turret computer, a hinge, and a link tool. We'll start off by plopping down an azimuth rotator so the whole turret can rotate around 360 degrees horizontally. Next, we need some vertical clearance, so plop down a few blocks. A beam weapon can extend up to 9 units, so make sure that the pillar is high enough. For the elevation mechanism, we could use a rotator as well, but in some cases the elevation segment can clip through geometry, which we obviously don't want to happen. Instead, we will use a hinge. Now that you've placed it down, you can go ahead and install your weapon of choice as well. We still need a way to set up the behavior for this turret. This is where the turret computer and the link come in. It doesn't matter where you install the computer, even if it's on other child entities. It needs to be connected to the azimuth rotator, the elevation hinge, and the weapon. Don't worry if the hinge wasn't ticked on the checklist. It will be, once you link the turret computer to the weapon. The correct setup of the turret is also indicated by a white diamond shape linking the azimuth and rotation axes, and a white arrow overlay on the weapon. In some cases it won't come online, but we will talk about them later in the video. If you are planning on installing multiple coaxial weapons, make sure to link to all of them from the turret computer, unless you don't want them to fire automatically. Once you access the turret computer, you will be presented with a few drop-down lists. Tracking mode tells the turret which targets it should track. Regardless of what you pick here, autonomous turrets won't attack friendlies. Auto mode is useful when facing many attackers simultaneously, since turrets will all focus on one of the closest enemies and switch to a different target if necessary. Spaceship target mode is pretty self-explanatory. Your turrets will stay on hostile target you click with your MMB or middle mouse button. The none mode acts the same way as if you unlinked the computer from the turret. That renders the turret non-operational. The next drop-down list features auto-fire behavior. You can leave it on, but if you want to spy on enemy warships without firing upon them up front, I suggest switching it off and using a hotkey gate instead, which we'll tackle later. Then, there are two lists where you can pick the minimal and maximal ship size you want your turret to aim at. It is an extremely useful tool for warships which often find themselves defending against small and nimble fighters whilst focusing high caliber fire on an enemy warship. Oh, and yeah, it also tells you the weapon's range. But what if you want a higher degree of control over your turrets? What if you want your turrets operated by players instead of the ship's AI? For that, you have to grab a yoke, a camera, a hotkey gate, and a seat, on top of the ingredients we equipped ourselves with earlier. I hope you haven't dismantled the turret we've built already, because it will serve as a baseline for what we're going to build now. First thing on the list is to establish correct rotation axes for both the azimuth and elevation mechanisms. We'll start off with the azimuth rotator. Contrary to common sense, we have to pick vertical from the turret axis drop-down list. You can think about it this way. A child entity produced by the rotator turns around an axis that is perpendicular, or vertical, in relation to the plane we placed it upon. As you might have already guessed, in case of the elevation hinge, we need to pick horizontal from the drop-down menu. Keep in mind that, depending on the orientation of the mechanisms, you might have to pick inverted input as well. We'll see if we need to do it by installing the yoke and linking it to the turret computer. Unless you want your crew to stand at their stations, I recommend using a seat. They don't even have to be on a common child entity too, which enables some interesting design possibilities. You also have an option to link a seat to the yoke, which automatically puts you in control of it whenever you choose to sit in that chair. As opposed to the computer, I don't recommend installing the yoke on either of the turret's child entities. When using a yoke in such configuration, whether sat down or not, the character cannot keep up with the movement, which results in a very peculiar camera behavior. Sadly, this means no Millennium Falcon style turrets. Aww. We still need to see where we are aiming, and the camera serves just that purpose. It's the best practice to place it on top of something along the weapon, and the handy indicator arrows will help us achieve that. Once you are happy with the placement of the camera, draw a link to it from the yoke you're going to operate the turret from. The last thing to do is to place down a hotkey gate, which will serve as a convenient means of pulling the trigger. In case of manned turrets, the way is fairly straightforward. We need to access the hotkey gates menu and take a look at the keybind drop list. Hotkeys 1 through 4 correspond to the numerical keys above the WASD section. Fire primary and fire secondary are left mouse button and right mouse button respectively. Lastly, the option labeled as landing gear is operated with the button G. Simply pick whichever hotkey makes the most sense to you and move on to the second drop list. Activation mode translates your hotkey input, like clicking the LMB, into on and off signals used by the logic systems. If you want to keep firing for only as long as you hold down the hotkey, pick the button option. The switch option maintains the on signal only until you press the hotkey again. Once you pick the activation mode, open the seat to make sure the turret turns correctly and change the rotation axis if necessary. Trouble starts when we decide that the turret should be operated by the pilot and have some degree of autonomy. That's not because it's gained conscience and is plotting how to enslave the human race. That's because of the functionality known as gimbal that can throw the automatic turret's aim off. Gimbal has been introduced not long ago, and it basically lets you shoot at the direction of your crosshairs instead of the direction the ship is facing. While this is very much a desired behavior in case of fixed weaponry and manned turrets, we really don't want it on an automatic turret. To counter that, we won't be linking the hotkey gate directly to the gun. Instead, we'll use an interface in the form of a switch. The reason for that is I believe that the hotkey gates can carry the input from the yoke's crosshairs, while switches and buttons cannot, so it gets lost in translation. The placement of the logic elements doesn't matter in terms of functionality, but we should always try to strike a balance between convenience and security. Try not to operate the turret before we create this link though, or else you might throw the aim off and have to replace the weapon. The connection is simple. Instead of drawing a link from the hotkey gate to the weapon directly, put a switch between them. We also must sever the link between the yoke and the turret computer. If we didn't and pressed tab to take a look around our ship, it would massively throw the turret's aim off, but only until we press tab again. When it comes to firing itself, we have a few options. Aside from auto-fire, which we covered earlier, we can use a button as the interface to have our turret fire as long as we press the corresponding hotkey, or a switch to have the fire toggle instead. It's worth noting that turrets that use a fire switch will continue to fire regardless of their target being in range or not, so please be careful when opening fire near friendlies. You don't have to worry about your ship opening fire on its own and getting destroyed when you were away. Even the turrets with full autonomy can only work when the ship is being piloted. Over the course of the tutorial, we've been working with a set of 2 child entities, which will cover most of the design needs you might have. However, there are cases where you want to use more than one entity per segment. For example, you can link one turret computer to multiple hinges and weapons, which means naval battleship-style cannons are perfectly possible. Each separate elevation hinge will even pick its own angle to maintain maximum accuracy. Nice! When it comes to multiple weapons on one turret, it's a good idea to pick the centermost weapon as a target painter. That way it will minimize the offset and maximize the accuracy. Since child entities are produced by all 4 kinds of mechanisms, we must pay close attention to which child entity we place the elevation and weapon segments on. Each turret segment can be comprised of multiple child entities, but in order for the turret to work, you need to follow a certain rule. each subsequent segment of the turret must be placed on a child entity produced by the previous segment. That means no intermediary entities. If you want to attach sloped armor plates or have the turret transform, you cannot place turret rotation axes on them, or else the turret will not work. Aside from additional coaxial weapons and real-life battleship-style turrets, you must think of every additional child entity you place as decoration. Since disconnected blocks don't become separate physical grids, you can build turrets that are seemingly comprised of more than 2 axes of rotation or appear as if they hovered in the air. As for deployable turrets that can be retracted into a hardpoint when not in use, we can't do it right now. Mechanisms used to accept many-to-one input, but they haven't for a while, and this is a key component to enable such designs, among many other things. However, Tsunamayo, the sole developer of the game, proved time and again that he cares about the community feedback posted on GitHub, so go ahead and post some. Building a turret is one thing, but perfecting it is another. When you are limited in power or heat dissipation capabilities, you want to squeeze out as much damage projection as possible. That's why we are going to discuss the current weapon meta. We will start off with lasers, which totally should be called blasters or plasma weapons. I know that might sound heretical to some, but unless you know you're gonna attack big targets up close exclusively, there is no point in using Gatling barrels. Their widespread, lower DPS and reduced range are just too big of a trade-off for a higher rate of fire. You'll be better off by daisy-chaining cooling barrels with or without any damage upgrades. Speaking of which, daisy-chaining is fairly simple to pull off. You just need to read the recharge time of the weapon in the array and divide it by the n number of weapons on that turret. We'll then place down n-1 timer blocks, each with its own end gate. The linking here is not difficult but tedious, since we need to link the fire trigger switch or button to all the timers and their end gates. Next step is to draw links from the timers to their respective end gates, and then link each of these gates to their own weapon. The only thing left to do is to type in the delays into each timer. If you have 4 lasers, each firing every 1 second, you need to set the 3 timers to 0.25, 0.5 and 0.75 seconds of delay. The reason to use the end gates in the first place is to have our weapons cease fire as soon as we let go of the trigger. Daisy chaining guns is a double-edged sword though. On one hand, it lets you build accurate rapid-fire manned turrets. On the other, it doesn't work with automatic turrets and disables the gimbal function for pilot-operated fixed guns. When it comes to lasers, recoil barrels have hardly any impact on the characteristics of the weapon, since they don't change the DPS and slightly reduce the spread. The range barrels seem like a much better solution. These are the sniper rifles of Starship EVO, the railguns. They cut down on DPS a bit, but on top of increasing accuracy, they raise the charge's velocity. In Starship EVO, laser charges have a fixed lifespan, so a higher velocity directly translates to increase in range. A big one at that. They also prove very efficient against very small and nimble targets, which can cause trouble to other laser barrels even at close range. I'd argue that against such threat you'd be better off with a beam weapon. The hit-scan nature of that kind of weaponry means that it's deadly accurate. You might want to use beams for everything then, right? Well, not really. They do come up short in some scenarios compared to lasers. Sure, they can slice up these pesky mosquitoes, but they deal noticeably lower hull damage, have way shorter range, cannot use barrels, and have significantly higher power and heat dissipation requirements. They do excel in disabling shields though. Shields are much more susceptible to heat damage and beams transfer a lot of it. A fully extended 9-unit long beam weapon deals more damage to shields than a fully extended 4-unit long laser weapon with all 4 heat damage addons. Speaking of addons, don't use charge addons. At all. They increase the salvo damage but don't change the DPS at all. Unless you are firing a laser upon a shield, all of that extra damage is gonna get wasted. There's no block in the game that has nearly as much HP as a laser with all 4 charge addons has damage. There's no penetration or flag damage aside from system blocks having a chance to explode upon being destroyed. Instead, I would like to divert your attention towards the overheat and damage add-ons. They increase the heat and hull damage respectively. Also the Supercharge add-on, which only works with the big block variants and introduces the 50-50 damage increase. All of the aforementioned add-ons increase the weapon's heat output. That's where the cooling barrels come in handy, and that's why fully extended beam weapons output so much heat. Personally, I'm a fan of expanding upon the given weapon's natural advantages, so I install overcharge add-ons on beams and equip lasers with damage add-ons. If you're short on power or cooling headroom, disabling shields with beams and then bombarding your enemy with laser fire is a pretty good tactic. As for the big versus small weapon variants, the rule of thumb is small ones take up way less space but have bigger power and cooling requirements for the same amount of DPS. So think ahead on what purpose you want your ship and armament to fulfill and pick your weaponry accordingly. All of the information we've learned today might as well be totally irrelevant in the years to come. Such is the nature of games in their alpha state, and that is perfectly fine. If the current gameplay changes significantly, I might redo the guide so that the information stays relevant. You too can contribute by writing a comment down below on stuff that I might have missed or on things that changed after the video's been published. Speaking of updates, if you're all about learning as much as you can about Starship EVO, subscribe to the channel cause I'm definitely gonna make more of this kind of stuff. I also stream this game regularly at twitch.tv/Indrosil, just follow the link down below. You can expect great music, friendly atmosphere and lots of innuendos to be on the menu, so feel free to drop by and say hi. Until then, thank you very much for watching and goodbye for now.